Order!
Kona nalalda. Kona kodit atanak Lord God oglok tuning megap tigut na kuoyumik. Inuilo ayok hangayok ilayak tut ikayok tawag lutik nunalap tingni. Habak tullo kanok tulle kag munakayaw lutik ihumakainig na kuoyumik tuniwag luwit. Not katibut inang neutibut tamay ta ikayok luwit. Heavenly Father, we thank you for this new day. We ask that you be with each and every one as we work together for our territories. We ask that you be with our families who are grieving in communities. We thank you that you give us strength as we ask, and we ask that you be with our elders, our community members, and help them through each day. We ask this prayer in Jesus' name. Amen.
Colleagues, I'd like to thank Annie Goose for opening guiding words and the blessing today. I hope everybody had a good weekend and prepared to get to work for the next 4 days. Minister statements. Minister for Housing, N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the only way this government can effectively address the territory's housing crisis is through true partnership with Indigenous governments. As stated in this government's mandate, Indigenous governments play an important role in advancing housing initiatives that meet the unique needs of N.W.T communities, and we must work closely with them to ensure we are implementing housing solutions that have a real positive impact on residents. In this spirit of true partnership, Housing N.W.T has signed 4 formal agreements with Indigenous governments that support collaboration on housing projects. Mr. Speaker, agreements have been signed with the Clecho government, Satu Secretariat, Deline government, and most recently, I proudly signed the collaborative agreement on housing with the Gwich'in Tribal Council. Building on the N.W.T's existing partnership with the Gwich'in Tribal Council, this agreement provides a formal framework for intergovernmental collaboration on housing-related matters in Aklavik, Inuvik, Tetlizé, and Sigachik, which will primarily happen through a housing working group. Together, we will prioritize community housing planning, coordinated program delivery, and joint housing delivery. Together, we will improve housing-related programs and services in Gwich'in communities. Mr. Speaker, the N.W.T's formal housing agreements, memorandums of understanding, and memorandums of agreement are tailored to each Indigenous government and build on existing intergovernmental agreements currently in place, acknowledging the relationships that have already been built and work that has already been advanced. We look forward to signing more agreements with interested Indigenous governments over the lifetime of this Legislative Assembly. With that said, Mr. Speaker, even where no formal agreement is signed, the N.W.T has made it its priority to engage and work with Indigenous governments across the territory. The N.W.T Housing Forum, for example, is a body co-chaired by Housing N.W.T and an Indigenous government. Currently, the Yellowknife Dene First Nation. Is established in early 2023, this forum promotes coordination and collaboration among participating N.W.T governments in the housing sphere and plays an important role in promoting information exchange and cooperation between N.W.T governments on housing priorities. I appreciate having an ongoing venue to discuss housing priorities with Housing N.W.T and Indigenous governments as we work together to improve housing outcomes. Mr. Speaker, being from a small community myself and having traveled throughout the Northwest Territories, I have seen firsthand the Territory's unique housing challenges and how they range from community to community. By collaborating with Indigenous governments, we can maximize funding, provide more training opportunities to residents, increase economic activity, and build the capacities of Indigenous governments. Through partnership, we can implement housing solutions that meet the unique needs of the communities and build a stronger, healthier Northwest Territories where residents can truly set up to thrive. Koinaini, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Housing and N.W.T. Minister statements. Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As we're faced with another season of floods and wildfires, I understand that many communities and residents are concerned about the political disaster events. We have experienced a series of unprecedented disasters over the past 4 years. And as the snow melts, we are seeing dramatic changes in our landscape as a result of record low waters. In light of this, I strongly encourage residents to check with family, friends, and neighbors, and especially the elderly who may not otherwise have access to the internet, to collectively take action to prepare for this year's high-risk season. We have learned time and time again, including during last year's historic wildfire season, that we are stronger together and that the N.W.T. residents will be there for each other during the time of need. Mr. Speaker, we learned many lessons from last year's disasters, and we're not waiting to make further improvements to our emergency management system. Ahead of this year's high-risk season, the N.W.T. emergency plan was updated to better reflect its purpose and to make it easier to understand. We also clarified roles and responsibilities of communities as the leads for coordinating local emergency management in their communities, as well as how the government of the Northwest Territories, Indigenous governments, and non-government organizations work within the N.W.T. emergency management system. As lead for the emergency management, community government should have a local emergency management organization with participation from Indigenous governments and other community partners. We also want community governments to be empowered to involve Indigenous governments, Indigenous governments, non-government organizations, and private industry in the development of emergency plans, knowing that updates to the N.W.T. emergency plan identify what costs may be reimbursed to them should the disaster assistance policy be applied. Mr. Speaker, community government should have community emergency plans that are reviewed and periodically and practiced annually. The Department of Municipal and Community Affairs has contacted all community governments to offer assistance with planning activities and provide workshops to support this important work. The department has also provided tailored supports to the community governments, including presentations, meetings, and practice exercises since the 2023 high-risk season. The department has facilitated emergency plan workshops in 12 communities. Our government has also been proactive with improving our preparedness and capacity to respond to emergency events. The Department of Municipal and Community Affairs Emergency Management Division, the Emergency Management Organization, and all departments reviewed their procedures ahead of this year's high-risk season. We have also issued a call for surge staff to support all the departments and agencies when faced with emergencies, compiled a database of available staff, and have proactively provided training. Each department is also responsible for updating their own business continuity plans for a wide range of emergencies that may occur and impact departmental business. As part of this work, the Department of Municipal and Community Affairs has developed a shared resource on business continuity planning, including scenarios to assist with departments in identifying essential staff. An interdepartmental working group led by the Department of Executive and Indigenous Affairs is currently working to coordinate these plans. In advance of this year's high-risk season, the department has also rolled out its annual Emergency Preparedness Week and Be Ready campaigns to promote the importance of personal and family preparedness. This year, the focus is on the importance of having insurance and in making sure that people know what proof of insurance or prior refusal is required to be eligible for the assistance of the disaster assistance policy is applied after an event. While overland flood insurance may be difficult to obtain in some communities, fire insurance is usually included in general insurance for residents and businesses, and all homeowners, tenants, business owners, and organizations should check with their insurance coverage with their providers. As Northerners, we know all too well that emergency events can be stressful, disruptive, costly, and potentially devastating. We also know that with better preparation, we can mitigate some of the damages, stress, and financial impact. Community governments can do their part by ensuring emergency and business continuity plans are up to date and thoroughly addressing potential risks. Similarly, private businesses, non-government organizations, and residents are all encouraged to develop business continuity plans and emergency plans that consider their specific circumstances. I urge all residents to be prepared as the 2024 high-risk season approaches. Practical things that we can all do to protect ourselves, including developing workplace and household emergency plans that include plans for pets, preparing emergency kits, and a grab-and-go bag, and also getting insurance where available. It is also strongly encouraged residents to access information from trusted sources when emergencies occur, including local authority leads and the Government Northwest Territories Public Safety website, where residents can find information and other trusted sources of information for more detail. Using this website, residents can quickly access all relevant safety information, including the latest wildfire updates, highway conditions, and information about outages, air quality, and much, much more. In closing, Mr. Speaker, I would like to recognize all the good work that our staff have been doing since last summer and extend my sincere appreciation to all emergency responders who keep the N.W.T communities and residents safe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister, Municipal and Community Affairs. Minister statements. Minister statements. Member statements. Member from Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During my campaign last fall, I took time out from door knocking to attend the YELLOWKNIFE International Film Festival to support local N.W.T filmmakers. I personally love film shorts and was pleased to attend the Northern Shorts program, which was world-class. One of the shorts screened that night was She Gives Birth, a film that lays bare the anti-Indigenous racism and health services faced by many smaller communities across the North. When MLAs were briefed on the budget and told the midwifery program expansion was coming to a close, to better support our smaller communities and their needs for birth work, I was excited, Mr. Speaker. What was not relayed is that the program expansion coming to a close means the whole program in Yellowknife is theoretically done. While this funding is targeted to provide services in the Yellowknife area, it ultimately makes midwifery services stronger across the territory by stabilizing a system that is currently fragile and offering viable options for local N.W.T midwives to be trained in a center with many births and to retain them over the long term. Midwifery services in Yellowknife were planned out for the next 3 years to provide outreach to small communities and support opportunities for Northerners to pursue midwifery education. Mr. Speaker, no midwives were consulted on this decision. The program currently has 2 summer students, both of whom are studying outside the territory to become midwives and desire to return to Yellowknife to practice. They told me on the weekend, quote, "If this program is canceled, I'll have to work elsewhere and likely leave the N.W.T," end quote. They're also concerned that this means that they will have to pay back the funds they received from the N.W.T Health and Social Services bursary program. Mr. Speaker, in less than 24 hours, the N.W.T Midwives Association has close to 70 responses to their survey seeking feedback from Northerners on midwifery services. Mr. Speaker, why are we making short-sighted decisions that reduce service to folks who are giving birth and reducing options for students who began their studies in good faith that their work would help their fellow Northerners? I will have questions for the Minister of Health and Social Services at the appropriate time.
Thank you. Member from Great Slate. Member statements. Member from Boot Lake. Nuvik-Boot Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as you're aware, the Department of Infrastructure are currently reviewing the operations of MTS. Mr. Speaker, the issues with low water and problems with our current transportation corridor are likely not to go away anytime soon. Mr. Speaker, I think it's time we started to look outside the box. Logistically, is it time, Mr. Speaker, to look at locating a significant portion of our MTS operations in a more northern region of our territory? The base of operations in Inuvik or Tuck could service upriver to Fort Good Hope and, of course, the communities in the Beaufort Delta region. Mr. Speaker, while as a government we are good at governing, that doesn't necessarily mean we're good at managing businesses. And, Mr. Speaker, this is by no means a statement disparaging the important we do or our bureaucracy does, but it's my hope that as part of this review, an analysis will be completed to the merits of privatizing this essential service. Maybe, Mr. Speaker, there are private or Indigenous companies out there that may have some of the outside-the-box solutions to ensure that this important transportation infrastructure continues to serve our residents that rely heavily, Mr. Speaker, on its ability to deliver goods and services to our communities. Thank you.
Thank you. Member from Nuvik-Boot Lake. Member statements. Member from Mackenzie Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every community within the Northwest Territory should be accommodated at the same rate. Clavik is no different. For years, the community has been left out in major projects with the Thank you. The community of Clavik and its residents are isolated from the rest of the region during the spring and fall months of the year. Due to climate change, the opening of the ice road is happening much later, and the closing stages are earlier than previous years. The only access to the residents that have to the outskirts of the community is Biggest Road. The Biggest Road access gives the residents the opportunity to go harvest wildlife and firewood for their subsistence use. Due to climate change, the shoreline to the access road is eroding at a rapid pace. Mr. Speaker, not too long ago, maybe around 15 years ago, the shoreline was around 20 feet from the road. Today, it is less than 10 feet. The community and its residents would like to ensure that this road is kept safe and in good use for many more years to come. Mr. Speaker, in other regions of the Northwest Territories, most notably the hamlet of Tuktoyaktuk, have been given assistance to save their shoreline from erosion. The community of Clavik requires the same assistance because there is no room for expansion, and once the access road is gone, so will some of the lakes that are adjacent to this road, and that will have a negative impact on the aging infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, the community's water source comes from the river that runs along the access road, and when, not if, the road collapses into the river, it will have a detrimental effect on the quality of water. If we can save the road from collapsing into the river, the community and its residents may have the opportunity to continue with subsistence use, and the health of the residents may be safe for the foreseeable future. The infrastructure of the community has to be looked at for the long-term impacts that climate change is having on the community of Aklavik and its residents. Mr. Speaker, the community of Aklavik and its residents have been left out of the government's major projects for a number of years compared to the rest of the Northwest Territories. Mr. Speaker, I seek unanimous consent to conclude my statement.
Thank you. Member from Mackenzie Delta is seeking unanimous consent to conclude his statement. Seeing no nays, member, you may conclude your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The community of Acknowledgements and its residents have been left out of the government's major projects for a number of years compared to the rest of the Northwest Territories. Let us, the government, continue to let the community survive and strive for many years to come, as the motto of Acknowledgements is never say die. And only with the collaboration of this government and the community of Acknowledgements that we can keep this community safe. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Member from from Mackenzie Delta. Member statements. Member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's clear that at our territorial hospital, Stanton, we have a crisis on our hands. Particularly since COVID, we have demanded more and more from our frontline health workers. Staff have quit due to inadequate supports. Services have been closed and relocated to Alberta, and we have increasingly relied on expensive agency nurses to keep services open. The staff that remain feel increasingly taken for granted and under-supported. There's been a downward spiral in morale alongside an upward spiral in costs and inefficiencies. Mr. Speaker, in my discussions with healthcare workers at Stanton, we have come up with an idea for a cost-effective solution that I want to present now for consideration during these budget deliberations. While it doesn't fix everything, it could help release some of the immediate pressure and set us on a path towards better staff retention. The idea is to establish a task force. The task force could be staffed by 2 to 3 people who would act as navigators and brokers of solutions for frontline staff to address the low-hanging fruit causing the greatest frustrations amongst healthcare workers, especially when it comes to workplace policies and procedures and labour relations. Who makes decisions about what can be exceedingly confusing within our healthcare system? A task force would direct staff to the person with the authority to address their issue and support concrete actions to address it. Now, we currently have an Office of Client Experience and a Cancer Navigator program focusing on advocating for patients and helping patients navigate the system. The task force I'm proposing would have a similar purpose, except it's for staff. It could eventually become a more permanent fixture in our system, perhaps an Office of Provider Experience. The task force would need to be independent from management, but with access to leadership in order to be able to broker solutions. It should have similar authority as a senior advisor. Importantly, we need to choose members with expertise about our particular N.W.T healthcare system, but not pull existing staff out of other essential positions. The task force needs to be action-oriented, and on top of addressing individual cases, it should identify common problems and recommend systemic improvements, both in the short and long term. Mr. Speaker, I ask for unanimous consent to conclude my statement.
Thank you. A member from Yellowknife North has asked, seeking unanimous consent to conclude her statement. Are there any nays? Seeing no nays, you may conclude your statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So establishment of this task force should be accompanied by a commitment by the Minister and NTHSSA to take actions wherever possible to show that we truly value our healthcare workers and are responsive to their needs. I will be asking questions of the Minister at the proper time. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Member from Yellowknife North. Member statements. Member from Range Lake.
Mr. Speaker, when I stood in response to the Finance Minister's budget last week, my criticism focused on the government's failure to take decisive action on the priorities of our Assembly. One of the most urgent of those priorities, especially for my constituents in Range Lake, is the dire state of our frontline healthcare services, especially at Stanton Territorial Hospital. The deterioration of our frontline healthcare services is rapidly becoming a full-blown crisis. Our nurses are increasingly burdened with astronomical workloads as they try to provide adequate care in the face of staff cuts and unfilled positions. They often find themselves working short, and it is alleged that they are asked to take unsafe patient assignments that do not meet internal policies and the Canadian standards of practice. The ability for the hospital to manage at surge capacity is coming into question. The government's solution so far has only been to increasingly rely on private, out-of-territory agency nurses but this is only doing more harm than good. Relying on agency nurses is incredibly expensive. These private agencies undermine the public nature of our healthcare system, and the agency nurses themselves come with literal cultural sensitivity or training. Worst of all, they make our local nurses feel replaceable and undervalued at a time when their morale is already suffering. Mr. Speaker, nobody knows healthcare better than frontline professionals. They are speaking loud and clear. If the government wants to maintain quality patient care, they need to treat nurses and physicians with respect. They need to implement management structures that are flexible and responsive to their needs. And most urgently, they need to restore the competitive hiring edge the North once enjoyed to providing nurses with wages and benefits necessary to live in a region with such a high cost of living. Nobody wants to imagine a North where these circumstances continue to spiral out of control, but we are quickly running out of time needed to turn this situation around. I have been meeting with nurses, physicians, and union officials for many weeks now, and many of my colleagues on this side of the House are on the same page, united on what needs to get done. The question now is, when will this government get on the same page as us, nurses, doctors, and other healthcare professionals? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. Thank you, member from Range Lake. Member statements. Member from Tuna-Day-Willity.
Mr. Speaker, when MACA pulled the trigger last year to dissolve the elected government of Ford Resolution, they did so on their own accord. They put the responsibility on themselves to maintain the community emergency services and carry out all emergency planning. They have many policies and procedures designed to ensure that their department could follow through on an effective and responsible local government. The community was told everything would be done by the book through appointed officials who would uphold the law and respond to the community needs. For a full year, I tried to work with the department to help them follow through on their policies promptly, respond to their needs of Ford Resolution. I understood that the department took over the community as one territory government was replaced by another, and was patiently optimistic that the new government will get stronger and grasp the situation. It has also been my goal to see MACA follow the law and provide the best local government they can for the community until Ford Resolution can return to normal elected administration. Mr. Speaker, I'm disappointed to say that my constituents in Ford Resolution has been frustrated every step of the way, and so am I. Ford Resolution still has no emergency plan or proper emergency services. There are consequences to this inaction. This weekend's fire destroyed 4 homes early Saturday morning. Emergency responders have stepped up, but they were forced to rely on helicopters with backup buckets because their own intake lines no longer could reach the lake. Further efforts, several firefighters were also unfortunately injured with a broken hip and smoke inhalation. This is the second time in recent months that the fires severely damaged homes in a community already suffering from housing crisis. I made the department aware of the fact that the receding shoreline has left the water intake lines high and dry long ago. The fire department has also been vocal about the lack of training that could lead to unsafe situation. Now I hear that there's a wildfire burning 75 kilometers away from Ford Resolution. Time is running out for the community. It's also running out for the families who saw their homes burned down this weekend. What will it take for MACA to get its administration of Ford Resolution in order before more lives are put at risk? The community is anxious to avoid the fate of Enterprise, which is now full of burnt down homes that the territory government has no ability to rebuild for uninsured homes. Mr. Speaker, I have more questions in this appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, member from Tuna-Day-Willity. Member statements. Member from Mophie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have spoken in this House several times about my concern for elders and the hardships they face to pay for their house. I am concerned, Mr. Speaker, that the elders in my region have signed into agreements with housing that in many cases they did not fully understand. People signed into agreements with housing as this was the only options they had to maintain their home. What is happening in my region is that as people age and are no longer in the workforce, they struggle to make their housing payments on the limited income they have.
Mr. Speaker, I value the work of Housing N.W.T to assist people to enter a mortgage so they can own their own homes. But there needs to be more care taken to ensure that people are not being tied into mortgages they cannot afford. Mr. Speaker, I know elders in my region whose wages are being garnished through the court to pay for housing arrears that have been sent to collections. My concern, Mr. Speaker, is that GNWT could be doing more to support our elders. For elders who cannot make housing payments or fallen behind on payments, who are on fixed income and can demonstrate financial hardship, there should be some relief, whether it's a pause on collections, a forgiveness of all or some of the debt. The GNWT has the tools to ensure our elders live in dignity. We want our elders to remain in their communities surrounded by their loved ones and not living in poverty. The Housing N.W.T collection policy states arrears should be forgiven where collection is not possible, end quote. The Minister of Housing has stated that work is underway with the Department of Finance to address mortgage or rental debt on a case-by-case basis. Mr. Speaker, we need to see the GNWT come up with creative solutions. I will have a question for the Minister of Housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Member from Wolfe. Member statements. Member statements. Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Member from Yellowknife Center. Would you like number 3? Is that what you're asking for?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yes, I'd like to go back to item number 3 on the agenda. I guess in this case, I seek unanimous consent for being missed. Thank you.
Member from Yellowknife Center is asked to go back to number 3, seeking unanimous consent. Member, there's seeing no nays, you may conclude or get your member statement.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, colleagues. And just for that, I'll be a little extra nice to Cabinet who didn't name me today. Mr. Speaker, De Beers might have said, a diamond is forever, but I can tell you a diamond mine isn't, which leads to the question of what are we doing next to spur on our economy? The real question is, and many Northerners are curious, is what is the future of the N.W.T. Polytech? Mr. Speaker, I support education. I believe we must work to support Northerners as we deserve the opportunities to teach our own, to train our own, to welcome the world. Mr. Speaker, higher education is a true investment into our economy. And as we all know, education can be one of the greatest equalizers of people. It can help raise families from poverty to prosperity, Mr. Speaker. But like many things, let us not forget a diversified economy needs to be foremost on our mind, and we can't just assume it'll show up here on its own. Mr. Speaker, here is an unclear situation. Is the GNWT truly behind the Polytech? If you ask Aurora College, it becomes strangely unclear, because they have a different perspective on where the Polytech initiative is going. So when you hear the government say it wants to do this, it needs to do this, all I see is it dragging its feet in terms of financial investment. They can talk all they want, but where is the money? Mr. Speaker, I've been here long enough to know that when we hear vague statements that go nowhere, it's simply just daydreaming at best. Mr. Speaker, this government needs to put some momentum behind the Polytech initiative before it becomes too late. Mr. Speaker, we cannot stand by bureaucratic leadership. Do not let that be the hallmark of this Assembly. Mr. Speaker, we need clear commitments from this government saying we will do this by when. We want to do this by now. Mr. Speaker, we am going to get behind this. We will, we will, we will. If this government had courage, it'd say something to the effect of we will create 100 new social housing units. If this government had courage, it would say Mackenzie Valley Highway would advance by 150 kilometers, Mr. Speaker, or we'll raise graduation rates by 65% in 4 years. Mr. Speaker, my point being is that we need to see bold and courageous leadership, and we need to see the money in the budget. Mr. Speaker, in talking to Aurora College, they are investing themselves to create this transition. They are marching ahead because this government is not leading. So I'll tell you, this is the opportunity for this government to get out of the way or get behind, but somebody must make bold action. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Yellowknife Center. Member statement, member from Decho.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in February, I brought forward 2 motions on housing. The first motion moved that the Legislative Assembly acknowledge and affirm housing as a fundamental human right, and that the N.W.T align its existing laws and policies to be consistent with international human rights principles and obligations. The second motion called upon the N.W.T to enact a series of specific concrete actions that would effectively codify housing as a human right in our government. The second motion calls for amendments to the Housing N.W.T Act to enshrine the right into legislation, establishing the N.W.T Housing Forum, establishing a territorial housing advocate to review and evaluate the outcomes of the Housing N.W.T Act, and that the N.W.T work with the new Housing Forum to implement culturally appropriate housing solutions in collaboration with Indigenous governments. Mr. Speaker, the state of housing in the North right now is in peril. Core housing need is at an all-time high and is much higher than the national average, and homelessness is a growing challenge for all communities. Addressing the inadequacies of our housing stock and the increasing homelessness populations are issues that every level of government must work on together. Our government must work closer with Indigenous governments and organizations such as the Dene Nation and other regional community Indigenous governments to get better results for our residents. Overall, Mr. Speaker, our government must establish stronger wraparound supports for housing because it is important that we recognize the plaguing legacy of residential schools, which drove many Indigenous people into getting stuck in a vicious cycle of being reliant on public housing and income assistance. People are trapped and they can't get out. We must work to change these outcomes as our present housing programs and income support system is not resulting in the outcomes we want. We need an overhaul of our service to help people break free of being dependent on public housing and welfare. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from the Decho. Member statements. Member statements. Returns to oral questions. Returns to oral questions. Recognitions of visitors in the gallery. Member from Nuvik Twin Lakes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, this morning I had the opportunity to meet with 3 individuals from the Canadian Cancer Society, and I'd like to recognize Andrea Seeley, the CEO, Angeline Webb, and Fernanda Martins. Welcome.
Recognitions of visitors in the gallery. Member from Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I would like to recognize my page, who is here today from the District of Great Slave. That would be Oscar Mifflin. He is a student at Alain Saint-Cyr. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Great Slave. Member from Decho.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to recognize 3 pages I have from Kakisa School. Peyton Simba, Presley Simba, and Leah Simba, all from the Kakisa School. Welcome. Thank you.
Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Recognition of visitors in gallery. For those other special guests that are up in the audience there, welcome. And thank you very much for coming here. Welcome to your house, and we appreciate having visitors here. Thank you. Thank you. Recognition of visitors in gallery. Recognition of visitors in the gallery. Returns to the budget address day 2 of 7. Replies to the budget address 2 of 7. Acknowledgements. Acknowledgements. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member from Yellowknife Center.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I appreciate that. And as I said, that'd be nice getting the chance for unanimous consent. So it'll be nice this cabinet. Mr. Speaker, I want to know what this government's doing about funding the transition of the college to a polytech university, and that specifically goes to the Minister of Education. Where is the money and how much is the money? Thank you.
Thank you. Member from Yellowknife Centre. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. So in the life of transformation, Education, Culture and Employment has funded an Aurora College transformation team of 8 public servants who helped to do a lot of the work in conjunction with Aurora College, getting ready for this transformation, of which has 3 phases, and there are roughly 80 milestones in that project, and 66 of those were completed by the transformation team. The federal government kicked in $8 million for transformation, and in addition to that, this government also put in $1 million a year for approximately the last 5 years, specifically for transformation. And I know as well that Aurora College has been able to use their dollars for the Bachelor of Education program as well as the Bachelor of Social Work program towards transformation as well. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Oral questions, member from Yellowknife Centre.
Ask the question, I guess. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, where's the money to Aurora College specifically? They were before committee just over a week ago, and it sounds like they're self-funding the transition plan, and it would be nice to know that they were getting that money to do the work themselves. Or is this strictly a paper exercise by the Department of Education, and they're going it alone? Please clarify. Thank you.
Thank you, member from Yellowknife Centre. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, in addition to the dollars I've just said, the $1 million a year are what Aurora College is currently getting. And then in addition to that, they do have their operational funding dollars that they're able to redirect towards that as well, which is the dollars that they would normally use for the Bachelor of Education and Bachelor of Social Work program that are currently not running. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Oral questions, member from Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Minister's talking about all of these, this and that, but the reality is the college itself says it's not being funded specifically for the transition. We can talk about the programming all we want, but that said, the transition policy going from the college to the Polytech. Mr. Speaker, they're funding this out of their surplus. They have the staff doing this project and initiative, and the board is completely going ahead without the support of the department. So what is the department not understanding versus what the college is doing to make it into a Polytech? Thank you.
Thank you, member for Yellowknife Centre. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, there's other programs within the government that I think would really welcome $1 million a year in order to run transformation and to run a program. So currently the government of the Northwest Territories is giving $1.04 million to Aurora College. At this point, I have not had communication from the Board of Governors as to a requirement for additional dollars. But if they do provide me with that request, I would definitely sit down and talk to them about it. The other piece of this is when you are arm's length and you are working your way into a polytechnic, one of the exciting things is it really opens your doors as to where you can get some of that funding. And a lot of institutions across Canada source third-party funding in order to bring in extra dollars to be able to do more and bring in extra students to be able to do more. So I think it's a really exciting time for the Polytechnic and for Aurora College and through this transformation, and that there's a lot of opportunity that sits before them. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Final supplementary. The member from Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would encourage the minister to actually pick up the phone or send an email to the college because they have a completely different view of how the transition is being supported. Mr. Speaker, I guess maybe the only question really left to the day is, will the minister make that commitment to follow through so we can actually get a formalized commitment from this government in conjunction with the college that this is actually happening rather than these grandiose statements that aren't producing anything? So ultimately, will the minister do that? Thank you.
Yellowknife Centre, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm very happy to say I have a very good working relationship with the Board of Governors Chair. I speak with him approximately twice a week. I spoke with him as well, or received an email from him last night. I spoke with him last night again, carrying on with that twice a week timeline as well. And following the meeting with SCEDI, or with the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment, actually reached out and said, listen, if there's something that you are looking for, I encourage you to put it in a letter from the Board of Governors and to send it over to me, because I really want to maintain that positive working relationship and I want to see this project through. Thank you.
Thank you. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Oral questions, member from Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm excited that Health and Social Services and NTHSSA want to support birth work in our smaller communities. However, I understand that to build capacity in those smaller communities, work needs to be accomplished in the capital to sustainably grow midwifery capacity throughout the territory. Yellowknifers also need access to midwifery, so can the minister please explain to me why this program is effectively proposed to be shut down? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, members. I will allow the question, but folks, you got to remember that anticipating matter that's on the orders day for consideration of this sitting. So that the budget is in the committee of the hall. So if you could maybe reword the question so that it's not about a budget and we're not negotiating on the floor, that would be greatly appreciated. Member from Great Slave.
So I guess my question is, the proposed budget is saying the positions will be cut, and I'm wondering why that might be.
Thank you. Minister of Health and Social Services. I was going to give it to Education.
On it. Mr. Speaker, I just want to clarify the expansion of the midwifery service into Yellowknife has been proposed. Existing midwifery service in Fort Smith and Hay River are not affected. The Health and Social Services system proposed this into Yellowknife, but there has been years of recruitment and retention challenges in the Yellowknife midwifery area. Despite years of dedicated efforts, advocacy, there's just been a continuation of this. But I just want to make sure that, the members know and the public know. In addition to this, it's important to remember that the expansion of the midwifery service into Yellowknife is an enhancement to the existing birthing options that already exist. And it's, I'm here, I've traveled, to Fort Resolution on the weekend and I hear from the community members in the small community that they don't even have basic services. So when we're talking about doing the work that we are doing in this House, we're trying to make sure that we're not duplicating service. And I understand and I fully am behind Indigenous, the work with Indigenous midwifery. But what's going on right now, this is a decision that's, put before us, and, I'm continuing to put the efforts into making sure that the midwifery program in Fort Smith and in Hay River is supported, and we can get those programs so they're not shutting down. We just announced that Fort Smith being just opened again after being shut down. So this is very important that we can get these two communities functioning properly before we can even consider expanding. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Health and Social Services. Colleagues, the main estimates are on order paper for later today in Committee of the Whole. As per the guidelines for oral questions and rules 1.7, is that 1 or D? D.7 bracket 6. Question must not anticipate a matter visited on order paper consideration at that sitting. You will have an opportunity to ask those type of questions during the budget, during the Committee of the Whole. I apologize to the Minister and to the member. So, member from Great Slave.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I do not want to break any rules, so I suppose I don't have any further questions. Thank you.
Thank you, member, and I apologize. I should have called that at the beginning there. Oral questions. Member from Tuna-Day-Willity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, on May 5th, 2023, the MACA Minister wrote to the Worship Mayor of Fort Resolution, Patrick Simon, citing the Hammond Act and for failing to meet their obligations. So they pulled the trigger to take over the third-party management of the Ford Resolution. But at the same time, it's been a year, and MACA is still not taking responsibility for Ford Resolution with following their own rules and procedures, so that's concerning. Mr. Speaker, MACA has been responsible for governing Ford Resolution for a year, but still has not implemented an emergency plan, nor have the proper support of the community emergency services. Another fire this weekend burned down several housing units. Mr. Speaker, we just don't want to have a repeat of what happened in Enterprise. So my question to the Minister, Vince McKay, is will MACA work with Housing N.W.T to rebuild the homes lost in Ford Resolution this past weekend? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Trinidad-Willity. Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are well aware of the situations that happened in Fort Resolution this weekend. During the whole event, Cabinet was made aware of the situation, and communication was constantly ongoing to ensure the safety of the residents of Fort Resolution. To the question, MACA is engaged with housing, and they're leading the work in respect to the homes that have been lost in Fort Resolution. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs. Oral questions, member from Trinidad-Willity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister. What are MACA's plans to deal with the nearby wildfire if to begin to move towards community for resolution? As there are no emergency plans in place? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Trinidad-Willity. Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Wildfires are the responsibility of ECC. When it comes into the community, the Department of MACA will be involved. Even prior to it coming to the community, the Department of MACA will be involved. We will have staff, regional EMO, local EMO involved during that time to prepare of any potential emergency. That being said, the emergency plan has been continually being worked on. It's been involved in the community or it's been communicated to the community for involvement from NGOs and other agencies. And the draft plan is expected to be completed by middle to end of June, or early June, sorry. And once completed, it will be available publicly to all residents of Fort Resolution. Thank you.
Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs. Oral questions, member from Trinidad-Willity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Minister. As you know, I mentioned that the water intake lines in Fort Resolution has been a problem for the last year, and as the water is receding, and the fire over the weekend just added to the problem because the fire was drawing so much water, the water intake lines couldn't keep up with the demand. And so is the Minister going to address this issue so that whether we move the lines out further just so that we can keep up with the demand? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Trinidad-Willity. Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The water plant was operating as designed. 60,000 liters is required for fire flow, and Fort Resolution has 129,000 liters capacity. The fire took an exceptional amount of water. Because of that, the Department of Infrastructure was notified, and a water tanker truck was brought in from Hay River to support the firefight efforts. Also, we are going to work with the community to look at doing a fire flow bypass in the water intake for the community in the case need of emergency, but also we are looking at other options for getting water off the lake in case of an emergency. Thank you.
To Minister of Municipal Community Affairs. Final supplementary. Member from Trinidad-Willity.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, my next question is that we had a firefighter that had injuries who broke his hip, and the other one has problems breathing. Is MACA have anything in place, or the Hamlet Fort Resolution right now to look at how we could cover some of these injuries and his loss of work, etc.? Thank you.
Member from Trinidad-Willity. Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are aware of the injury during the firefight. That being said, the Hamlet is reviewing with the insurance coverage with the insurance provider for the incident, and MAC is also going to be working with the administrator to assist in the confirmation of the insurance policies for the fire department. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs. Oral questions. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in February of this year, my friend, the Minister of Health and Social Services, had mentioned that she was going to raise the issue of agency nursing at the national level, in particular with the Federal Minister of Health. So can she report back on what efforts she's made? I note that other provinces have now committed to banning or severely reducing the use of agency nurses. Where are we at? Thank you.
Member from Range Lake, Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I was able to meet with the Minister of Health. I attended the meeting alongside 2 members from the Council of Leaders. We discussed the issues that related to the Northwest Territories. Agency nurse was one of them. This is a discussion that is continuing at the federal level, and there is a ministers' meeting that will be happening, I think, in the fall time, and that is again on that agenda. But I would just like to make also aware that right now in the Northwest Territories, we do only have 5 agency nurses which are working in obstetrics right now to make sure that we can still provide those services in the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Health and Social Services. Oral questions. Member from Range Lake.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it cost the government $4.4 million last year in private agency nurses. That's equivalent to 31 positions. So I'm not sure if it's 7 agency nurses to 31 public nurses, but that's a staggering ratio, and the amount of money we're spending on these. So we need to put a stop to it. We need to wean ourselves off this addiction to private agency nurses. They're not working for our staff. They're not working for Northerners. I appreciate we want to keep the lights on in obstetrics, but there must be other solutions. So can the minister bring forward a plan, working with the authority, on staffing OBS without the use of private agency nurses? And can she bring it forward tomorrow? Thank you.
Thank you, member from Range Lake. 2 questions there. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And yes, I can say that we are changing the staffing model in obstetrics, which is being done to support the obstetric nurses, as per some of the concerns that have been brought up over the years. And Mr. Speaker, you know, when we talk about the cost that agency nurses have costed, the cost that it cost the government for closing down the obstetric unit for 2 months was $1 million. So if we were to close it down, that's 700 births in the Northwest Territories annually in the obstetrics unit in Yellowknife. Those people would have to travel. 2 months, it costs us $1 million. So a year, and putting those families, displacing those families, if we don't come up with, you know, if we can't staff it, that is a priority too. You know, we have to look at all different sides of it, and that's my job to be able to do that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Health and Social Services. Oral questions, member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we hired 84 nurses, frontline nurses, last year, and of those 84, 69 left. Recruitment's become a revolving door. We must have a solution. We must staff these wards. So OBS worked just fine until it stopped working. What was working at OBS that's not working now? Can the minister tell us? Thank you.
Hear, hear.
Thank you, member from Range Lake. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we, like I said in the House before, we haven't used agency nurses. We've been able to recruit, retain, you know, the salary of nurses haven't changed. And so the other territories and provinces are starting to compete better. There's lots of different things that are in place that is challenging us to recruit. COVID, many people left the healthcare field. That is the biggest impact on our healthcare system, and we're still trying to recover from that. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Services. Final supplementary. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, just for, if my arithmetic's right, that's 15 net frontline positions that we were able to recruit from last year, and I think that's a shame. we need to do something. I'm going to propose again that the minister work on phasing out agency nurses within a period of time. So let's throw a date out there. Will the minister agree to phase out agency nurses by the end of 2026? Thank you.
Hear, hear.
Thank you, member from Range Lake. Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I will not commit to anything that would impact our patients' health. And so if there are ways to get around this, that we can increase our staffing and our workflow, and maybe the changes that we're making in obstetrics right now will help to better. But it's not just it's not just obstetrics. You know, there's other areas in our small communities that we're struggling to get health CHINs, so community health nurses. Those healthcare shut down. It's going to impact those communities greatly. You know, so there's so many things that we need to look at before we just discontinue the use of agency nurses. I'd rather not use them. I'd rather not use them. I'd rather use that money to keep it in the territory, and you know, and if there's more nurses that want to train in obstetrics or in community health nurses, you know, that's something that we're trying to develop. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Health and Social Services. Oral questions. Member from Nunavut Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in my statement, I spoke about MTS and the need to think outside the box with some suggestions. One of those suggestions, Mr. Speaker, was looking at moving all or part of the operation further north to Nunavut. And I know the department is currently doing a review. Can I ask the Minister of Infrastructure if part of that review will look at relocating some of MTS to the north? Thank you.
Member from Nunavut Lake, Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the review itself at this point, which is quite close to being completed, doesn't consider, to my knowledge, whether or not to split the operations up, but really rather to look at what different types of models there might be for the operations as a whole. Thank you.
Minister of Infrastructure, member from Nunavut Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And again, I reiterate, I think that should be a part of what these governments are going to do with MTS. Can I also ask the Minister, has the part of the review process, as well as the department, engaged with Indigenous governments on how MTS is affecting everyone in the region? Thank you.
Member from Nunavut Lake, Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the process of the review did send out an invitation, I believe, at the end of last year to communities who rely on MTS so that they had the opportunity to participate. I don't have details in front of me confirming which communities did or did not. I know that some did, but I don't know if all responded to that inquiry to participate. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Infrastructure. Oral questions, member from Nunavut Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So we're not committing to moving it to a location that would make absolute better sense. We're not sure what the Indigenous governments are saying about this. So, Mr. Speaker, maybe it's time we look at privatizing it, look at Indigenous governments or private partnerships to sell this business and have someone run it outside of government. Mr. Speaker, would the Minister of Infrastructure comment on consideration for privatizing MTS?
Thank you. Thank you, member from Nunavut Lake. Minister of Infrastructure.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, that is exactly one of the questions that is part of this review, is what kinds of different governance models we might have for MTS. Not that long ago, MTS was privately owned, and it went into receivership. And when it went into receivership, all of the communities that depend on the resupply were put at risk. And at that point is when the government decided to step in. From that point forward, I'm not sure it has ever turned a profit. So if somebody out there wants to take it off our hands, that might be very good news. My concern becomes resupply, to ensure that we as a government are not leaving small communities in a situation where they can't rely on a situation for resupply. So again, that is part of the review. Different governance models, Crown Corporation, privatizing, maybe those doing the review, which hasn't reached my desk yet. I think it's due only just next month. Maybe they've got those creative solutions that my colleagues across the floor are looking for, and I'd certainly look forward to that opportunity to discuss it with them as soon as we have those options before us. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Infrastructure. Oral questions. Member from Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So my questions are for the Minister of Health and Social Services. Can the Minister first explain the basic rationale behind setting up the Office of Client Experience and what have been its successes? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Member for Yellowknife North, Minister of Health and Social Services.
Oops. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the purpose of the Office of Client Experience was to improve patient navigation service and support a better interaction with health and social service system. The outcomes for the OCE include better awareness of client rights and responsibilities, improved client and family experience, streamline access to supports and services, making culturally safe care experience for Indigenous clients and families a priority, increase access to cultural and language supports for clients, and building staff capacity for Indigenous client-centered care and perspectives. We anticipate the work of this office will result in better understanding of Indigenous clients and family concerns and issues. This will be supported by data tracking and qualitative analysis. We want to see system-level actions and changes to ensure healthcare system is meeting the needs of residents, and the Office of Client Experience is critical to us understanding the improvements we can make to support that change. So it's been over a year that this office was established, and we've had over 1,000 requests that have been supported to date, and 65% of those have been from Indigenous people who identify as First Nations, Métis, and Inuit. And satisfaction survey results indicated that most people who used the service felt heard, respected, and culturally safe when accessing the service. The program is Indigenous design and led with little staff turnover, and pathways have been established for building relationships with clients, families, and community. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Health and Social Services. Oral questions, member for Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So does the Minister see any value in setting up an office, perhaps parallel to the Office of Client Experience, but to advocate for healthcare providers in order to alleviate workplace frustrations and improve staff retention?
Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, what I do see the potential is some of the work that we're doing, the employee satisfaction survey we have just completed. We don't have the results yet, but a lot of that could help drive some of these changes that, that the member might be talking about. While most care staff are represented by labor organizations such as UNW, N.W.T, Medical Association, who also advocate on their behalf, I really appreciate the member bringing this idea forward, and I have had discussions with Minister of Finance, my colleague, and on discussing this further with the member as well as the minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Health and Social Services. Oral questions, member from Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the minister commit to examining the feasibility of setting up a task force on improvements for healthcare frontline staff? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Yellowknife North, Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As I do see value in some type of a, something, whether it's a task force or whatever we call it, I'm not prepared to commit taking this specific action today, but I'm interested in, like I said, to continue this discussion and using some of the things that we have, as well as, I believe, the work that we've been doing with the engagement strategy for health and social service system, and I believe that this work needs to have an opportunity to launch and begin to have impacts as well. But we will also be renewing the health and social service human resource plan, as the current plan has just ended. The next plan will give us an opportunity to refresh our understanding of what is needed to make some positive headway as we work to improve the recruitment retention of valuable healthcare workers in the Northwest Territories. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Health and Social Services. Final supplementary, member from Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So my final question is will the minister report back to this House before the end of this sitting on whether she intends to set up a task force or some structure similar to what I've described today? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Yellowknife North, Minister of Health and Social Services.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm not prepared to make that commitment for the end of this sitting. As the member, we all know how busy we are during sittings and trying to be able to come up with a plan within the next 2 weeks to be able to come to the floor. But I will bring forward to the Assembly a report of the Health and Social Service System Human Resource Plan that concluded on March 31st, and I will also work to ensure that dialogue begins on the new Human Resource Plan, which sets out the course in this area for the next several years. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Health and Social Service. Mr. Clerk, can you pause the clock for a sec? Colleagues, I'm going to take a short break and I'll be back. So I got to make a phone call. member statements, or sorry, oral questions. Let's try that again. Oral questions. Member from Mophie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, has the Minister of Housing documented the reasons elders fall into arrears? Thank you.
Thank you. Member from Mophie. Minister of Health or Housing, N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Could she repeat the question? I missed it. Sorry, Mr.
Thank you, Minister of Housing, N.W.T. Member from Mophie.
Thank you. Has the Minister of Housing documented the reasons elders fall into arrears? Thank you.
Member from Mophie. Minister of Housing, N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think the MLA is asking about elders, and this is something she's brought up over the last number of months with many elders that are falling into arrears. I'm sure there's many reasons why elders are falling into arrears, and she has kind of explained some of those reasons, and Housing does some analysis with it and does work with clients into why they are falling into arrears. There is some counseling available to clients, especially those elders, so we can provide more information. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Housing, N.W.T. Oral questions, member from Mophie.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. There are elderly people in my regions and in other regions in the N.W.T. who want to become homeowners but are not able to due to arrears. So what is the minister doing to encourage homeowners for clients over 60 years old? Thank you.
Thank you, member from Mophie. Minister of Housing, N.W.T.
Mr. Speaker, our district offices as well as headquarters, Housing N.W.T. headquarters would provide information to clients that are interested in becoming home ownership clients. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister of Housing, N.W.T. Oral questions, member from Mophie.
Can the minister fast track the home ownership process for clients over 60 years old? Thank you.
Member from Mophie. Minister for Housing, N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We'd have to consider any application. There is a process for that application, and we'd have to follow the process. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Housing, N.W.T. Final supplementary, member from Mophie.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The reason why I asked that question is because many of the elders are aging, and time is of essence. So can the Minister of Housing write off the arrears for clients over 60 years old? Thank you.
Thank you, member from Mophie. Minister for responsible or Housing, N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we have a number of clients that are on the arrears list for Housing N.W.T. Across the north, we have many clients that are on the arrears list. Housing N.W.T. does review this file annually, so I'd be pleased to meet with the MLA to discuss a case-by-case for elders that are have arrears with Housing N.W.T. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister Housing, N.W.T. Oral questions, member from the Date Show.
Show no fear. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In my member statement, I mentioned the two motions that I brought forward in February on recognizing housing as a fundamental human right in the N.W.T. It has been 90 days since I brought these motions forward. Can the Minister of Housing N.W.T. advise when she intends to table a response to those motions? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from the Date Show, Minister responsible for Housing, N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the member for the question. Mr. Speaker, in accordance with the accepted Legislative Assembly conventions, Housing N.W.T. is completing its research and work on the motion and will table a response at the beginning of the next sitting of the Assembly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from or Minister for Housing, N.W.T. Oral questions, member from Decho.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, former Premier Cochrane tabled A Way Home, a comprehensive strategy to address homelessness in the Northwest Territories. Can the minister speak to the status on how the implementation of that housing strategy is going and explain what has transpired since it was tabled? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Decho. Minister for Housing and N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Housing and N.W.T. is supporting the Department of Executive and Indigenous Affairs, who is the lead on implementation of A Way Home. Housing and N.W.T. is supporting the work of an interdepartmental working group to implement that strategy, and our work has included supporting statistical analysis on homelessness, preparing for transition of shelters, and some programs currently implemented by Housing and N.W.T., as well as working on looking for partnership solutions to see housing built to better meet the needs of vulnerable populations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Housing and N.W.T. Oral questions, member from Decho.
Thank you to the Minister for that response. Mr. Speaker, in reference to A Way Home, can the Minister explain what actions Housing and N.W.T. is doing and its engagement with other departments in establishing stronger wraparound supports for people living in public housing across the N.W.T.? Thank you.
Thank you, member from Decho. Minister responsible for Housing and N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as noted in today's minister's statement, Housing and N.W.T. has established 4 formal partnership agreements, as well as supporting many informal arrangements with funding for projects and working on community housing plans. Although still under development, Housing is supporting such ideas as supportive housing projects, tiny home projects, and other programs that will support vulnerable populations in the communities. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister responsible for Housing. Final supplementary, member from Decho.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister explain what work has been done so far since the 20th Assembly in terms of working to create partnerships and increase collaboration with Indigenous governments to improve housing in newer ways? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from the Decho. Minister responsible for Housing and N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, as noted earlier, Housing and N.W.T. has signed a collaborative agreement with the Gwich'in Tribal Council since the beginning of the 20th Assembly. Housing and N.W.T. has also had meetings with communities such as Fort Resolution to discuss either formal or informal agreements to work together on housing priorities. We continue to work with housing working groups established in communities such as Port Good Hope to support work of the Casho-Kootenay Housing Society. Housing and N.W.T. is also working with community organizations on community housing support initiatives to complete projects that are community priorities. Housing and N.W.T. has also amended that program to allow for it to be used for seed funding to help organizations higher capacity to apply on funding programs being offered by Canada or other external organizations. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister responsible for Housing and N.W.T. Oral questions. Member from Mackenzie Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions are for the Minister of NACA. Every community within the Northwest Territories should be accommodated at the same rate. Clavik is no different. For years, the community has been left out in major projects with the government of the Northwest Territories. I'd like to see the Minister and his department step up and assist the community of Aklavik in saving the shoreline within its municipal boundaries for future use. Can the Minister and his department look at ways to finance the restoration of the shoreline, whether it be with other departments or give us direction through federal government programs? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Mackenzie Delta. Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am aware of other communities that have reached out for funding for emergency remediation on banks, riverbanks, like berms and stuff like that of Hay River. So I will look into it with the department and see what we can do for your community. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs. Oral questions, member from Mackenzie Delta.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the minister look at sending a team of engineers to the community to see how the road can be restored? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Mackenzie Delta. Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs.
Yeah, Mr. Speaker, I'm just notified that the Department of Infrastructure is working with MACA to work with the community on getting some funds available to do some work. Thank you.
Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs. Member from Mackenzie Delta.
Thank you to the minister for that good response. Okay, I just deleted one of my questions there. Okay, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the minister commit to joining other ministers on a Mackenzie Delta tour scheduled for July 16th and 17th? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Mackenzie Delta. Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm always willing to get out to the communities and see the region, so I would be willing to work with the member on a tour if need be there. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs. Oral questions, member from Yellowknife Center.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions today will also go to the Premier, who represents the Department of Justice. Mr. Speaker, I noticed recently on a visit to the Land Titles Office, they actually charge for a person to access, just to look at their own title. And it's representative of a bigger picture of the fact that these are nickel and dime fees, and I suspect that they don't garner a whole lot of money to float this government. That said, my question specifically to the minister is he aware that an individual, as in a singular person, goes to the Land Titles Office and has to pay, I think it's $5 or $4 to see their fee? Is he familiar with that issue? Thank you.
Thank you, member from Yellowknife Center. Mr. Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And so I'm familiar with that accessing some of the registries like the corporate registries and land titles do involve a fee. I've never tried to access my own. I was actually just trying to do that, but I didn't get it in time for the question, but I would assume I would have to pay for my own information just the same way as anyone else. So I am aware. Thank you.
Mr. Premier. Oral questions, member from Yellowknife Center.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm not going to pull the fee number, but I think it's $5 for argument's sake. And if not, I mean, who cares? It's either 4 or 5. I mean, it's a moot point. The issue is the constant nickeling and diming of Northerners as we go about even just accessing our own personal information, and that kind of seems frustrating when you talk to constituents. Mr. Speaker, would the minister go back and look at how many individual citizens are actually paying that over the last 2 years? Now, I'm not talking about corporations or lawyers who are trying to garner access. I'm trying to find out, is the everyday person wanting to find out a little bit about their own personal information? Would the minister look into that? Thank you.
Thank you, member from Yellowknife Center. Mr. Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I will look into whether or not we even have that information. I'm not sure whether that information is collected or not, but I can look into it, and then, if possible, we can put that information together, but I'm not even sure it's possible. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. Oral questions, member from Yellowknife Center.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the, I guess I'll call it commitment, because I mean, it's tough to look into something until you know what you're looking into. That said, this speaks to the broader issue of the red tape initiative, which then bridges into these little micro costs that annoy the people from the day-to-day costs. So that said, if the Premier is able to look into that, or I should say the Justice Minister, sorry, is able to look into that, I mean, what else is this government assessing with respect to these micro costs that eat at everybody's day-to-day lives? Thank you.
From Yellowknife Center. Mr. Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. When somebody needs some information and they want to go forward and get it, In some cases, it probably is reasonable that that person pays. It's a user pay system. Otherwise, everybody else pays for that person's access. And so that is something that we need to take into consideration. I understand what the member is saying. It's some of these small irritances that impact people the most because they have to engage with those time and time again. But all the nickels and dimes add up, Mr. Speaker. We're trying to deliver serious services for people. We're trying to deal with climate change and natural disasters, and we want to make sure that we're putting our money where it's most important. And so, am I fully committed to getting rid of fees if people want to look at their own land titles? I can't say that right now, but I at least understand where the member's coming from. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. Final supplementary, member from Yellowknife Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've already accepted the offer of the Premier to investigate and then sort of take it from there. And I was speaking in my last question more about the broader sense of the red tape initiative as we proceed forward. I do agree fully that nickels add to dimes, et cetera, and it all makes a difference. But when we're barely paying anything for the service, it begs the question. It costs more to process the payment than it actually did to do the work. So I guess my only question, Mr. Speaker, at this point is based on that principle of what is the government going to do to evaluate the red tape initiative concept in this government, whereas we're spending more in time than we're making in fees, and hence it's costing the government money just to process payments. Thank you.
Member from Yellowknife Centre, Mr. Premier.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If it's costing us more to deliver it than the fees, I'm not sure we want to increase the fees to cover the full cost. If we did that for ATIP, it would be thousands of dollars everyone would have to provide per request. But when the member talks about reducing red tape in this initiative, this is a conversation that I'm really excited to have with the rest of the ministers, because this is something that is across government. We had initiatives last year. The Minister of Finance has a nice little award sitting on her desk, a pair of golden scissors, because we cut so much red tape in the last government. And this year, I want to see an even bigger pair of golden scissors on our desks, because we've made advances. This is a serious issue, Mr. Speaker. It's all of these little things that add up and that people have to deal with day after day. So I really look forward to working with ministers from different departments to figure out how we're going to go through policies, programs, legislation, and how we're going to create ways to develop legislation in the future that minimizes red tape. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Premier. Oral questions, member from Mophie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's a continue with my housing question. Can the Minister of Housing prioritize the transfer of housing stock to elderly clients over 60 years of age who live in their family home? Thank you.
Member from Mophie. Minister responsible for housing N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd have to look at the information with housing N.W.T. and follow up with the member regarding the question of prioritization. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister responsible for housing N.W.T. Oral questions, member from Mophie.
Thank you. Can the Minister of Housing direct new resources to work with elderly clients who are out of the workforce yet accumulating arrears on their housing unit? Thank you.
Thank you, member from Mophie. Minister responsible for housing N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. What housing N.W.T. can do is we can look at the cases again with elders that are facing arrears and follow up with the member. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Responsible for housing N.W.T. Oral questions, member from Mophie.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Can the Minister of Housing modify the collection process to support elders to age in place? Thank you.
Member from Mophie. Minister responsible for housing N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like I mentioned earlier, we are looking at reviewing the forgiveness policy with housing N.W.T., and that will be brought to FMB and Cabinet and for discussion with the members. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Minister for Housing and N.W.T. Oral questions. Oral questions. Member from Trinidad Willity.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My question would be to the MACA Minister again. In regards to full resolution, I talked about the fire plan that's needed for that community because it's a hamlet, but in the community of Deda, Delo, and Thutsake, can the Minister, I'm not sure where they're at, maybe helping the community to get their fire plan in place? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you. Member from Trinidad Willity. Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As those communities mentioned have established community governments, they would be responsible for their local emergency plan. And if they require any further assistance with their local emergency plan, they could reach out to the Department of MACA for assistance in developing them or updating them. Thank you.
Minister of Municipal and Community Affairs. Oral questions. Member from Trinidad Willity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As you know that we had lost 4 units in full resolution this weekend. I just wanted to see if I could ask the question to the Minister of Housing as to
second set of questions for another member, so I'll put you back on the list. Oral questions. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, July 31st of 2023, the Minister of Education, Culture and Employment approved Aurora College's request to become a polytechnic university. And now we're hearing that there's a concern that there's never been appropriate funding for this transition. So can the Minister, today's Minister of Education, Culture and Employment, tell us, does the department feel that that request there's enough support behind that request that they approved previously last year? And yeah, let's just start there. Thank you.
Thank you, member from Range Lake. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it would really be up to the college to let me know what their needs are versus what they're receiving from the department, as I have not received a request for additional funding in any formal capacity at this point. It's hard for me to speak to whether or not they have the resources that they need and what those additional resources might be. In addition to the $8 million from the federal government, the $1 million a year over the last 4 years as well from the N.W.T, there was also the staffing of the 8 positions that did a substantial amount of the work in conjunction with Aurora College staff in a team-based approach to be able to put together a lot of the material needed to go through transformation. So there still is a significant amount of work, though, left to do, and I want to make sure that the college has the ability to get through that. Thank you.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Oral questions, member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I guess if the Aurora College has to come to the department to make a request, I would assume there's some evaluation that goes into that request before they sign off on it. But that's not this minister's responsibility. So I will ask another question. The new act that will govern Aurora College is scheduled to come into force on March 30th, 2025. Are we still on track? Is the department still on track to bring that legislation forward and have it in force at that date? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Range Lake, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
I'll wait. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'd like the opportunity to look at where all the deliverables are in the milestones for Aurora College and come back to the member on that question so that I can make sure that I'm giving him the most up-to-date information based on some of the delays that have occurred. Thank you.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. So, I mean, are we on track for to launch the new Aurora College on May 15th, 2025? Will that happen? Thank you.
Member from Range Lake. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, at this point there have been a few delays in the project, and it's anticipated that there will be a delay in the May 2025 launch date that was originally published. Thank you.
Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Final supplementary. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, is this government committed to ensuring the Aurora College transformation is successful? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Range Lake. Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I'm definitely committed because I see the great value in this project. I want to ensure that I'm providing the support that I can provide to the Board of Governors, who really is in charge of the operations of the college and the remaining work that remains to be done as far as transformation is concerned. I think it's really important, though, to note that the process of going through transformation is not just about a shiny new campus or anything like that. It also has to do with the programming that's being offered by Aurora College and being able to develop that and being able to make sure that we're offering degree programs at Aurora College and that the college is offering what students are looking for in the Northwest Territories. So it's also about the programming. It's not just about the bricks and mortar of an institution. And I think that those, for me, are what is really exciting for the evolution and transformation of the college. Thank you.
Member for Minister of Education, Culture and Employment. Oral questions from a member from Trinidad-Willity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. No, my question would be to the Minister of Housing. As you know, that we had that fire just over the weekend, and I understand that there's a process in place, and you're probably going to have some internal deliberation about where we go from here. My question to you is that the chief in full resolution made it very clear over the years that they really don't want to have any trailers brought into the community, because it doesn't provide jobs or economic benefits to the local businesses. So in your deliberation, can you consider looking at stick-built homes to replace these units in the community? Thank you.
Member from Trinidad-Willity, Minister responsible for Housing, N.W.T.
The chief is coming from in terms of local economy and local built homes. The situation is Housing N.W.T. is facing a fiscal crisis where we need more than we have. We don't have the money to stick-built homes. Modular units are much more affordable, and they are much more efficient in terms of timing into the community. So that's the situation we're in at this time, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister responsible for Housing, N.W.T. Oral questions, member from Trinidad-Willity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Minister, for your response. Just so you know, that that duplex that caught fire in Fort Resolution was stick-built, and the unit next door to that was a modular home, and it caught fire. So there is concerns with that idea of. I know the rationale behind it, but again, the stick-built homes are probably a way to go in the community because, like I said, the economic benefits to the community is important. So I just hope that you could consider that in your deliberation. Thank you.
Thank you. Member from Trinidad-Willity, Minister for Housing, N.W.T.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I understand the community's concerns and the situation that happened on Saturday with the fire in Fort Resolution. Over the next year, Housing is looking at a building standards framework, and hopefully this can be part of the overall discussion of how we build homes across the North. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister responsible for Housing, N.W.T. Oral questions, member from Trinidad-Willity.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Question to the Minister of Housing again is that now that that we have displaced families in the communities that were left out in the cold because of the fire, what are your plans to accommodate the families that are displaced right now in the community? Thank you.
Thank you. Member from Trinidad-Willity, Minister responsible for Housing, N.W.T.
Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, there is a number of displaced families in the community of Fort Resolution because of the fire on Saturday. Housing N.W.T. is working very diligently to ensure that all families have homes over the next couple of days. And the great thing is Fort Resolution had some vacant units, so they're looking at accommodating those families. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Member from Trinidad-Willity. Last final question. Oral questions. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, the Minister of Education and Culture and Employment talked about a shiny new campus in Yellowknife. Can she give the House an update on the progress of the Aurora College campus here in the capital? Thank you.
Member from Range Lake, Minister of Education, Culture and Employment.
Mr. Speaker, I don't have any information at my fingertips right now as far as the, when these things will appear in the Capitol. I would love to get an update on that for committee, and I can commit to doing so. But really, there's a lot of steps that need to happen before we end up with bricks and mortar institution anywhere in the territory, in addition to what we have right now. I know that in speaking to the Board of Governors, their prime focus right now is student housing. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment. Oral questions, member for Rangeley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, I think that's the point of the new campus is student housing. So what does the minister know about student housing here in Yellowknife? Thank you.
Member from Rangeley, Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I can tell you that the Board of Governors has identified that as their primary goal of how they'd like to start building some new infrastructure. They've identified that not just in Yellowknife, but also in Fort Smith and also down the road in Inuvik. And I can also update this House that it is something that they're very focused on, and that they acknowledge that it is a need in the territory in order to make sure that students have an opportunity to have somewhere to hang their head at night so that they can make it to class, and that place needs to, of course, be affordable. Thank you.
Education, Culture, and Employment. Oral questions, member for Rangeley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, it's becoming increasingly obvious that there's a disconnect between the Board of Governors and the ministry. Can the minister commit to working with the Board of Governors to better understand their needs and bringing a quantifiable, tangible proposal forward to a standing committee of this House, so we understand what they need to be successful in this transition, because they are saying they are on a knife's edge, and I for one don't want to see them teeter over. I want to see them succeed. I want to see our students succeed. It just seems like we're not at the same place here. And can the minister commit to righting the ship, getting us to where we need to be? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, member from Rangeley, Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment.
Mr. Speaker, I'm in a very interesting position where it's not really my story to tell. It's the Aurora College's story to tell. It's the Board of Governors' story to tell. So just like last time when it's not my story to tell. So my last time when I was in front of this House, I recommended to committee that they have Aurora College in front of them. They have done that, and I recommend that they ask Aurora College what their schedule is as far as their master plan for their facilities and also for their housing, and what they are doing in order to achieve those goals. Thank you.
Minister of Education, Culture, and Employment. Final supplementary, member from Rangeley.
Mr. Speaker, the minister gives the institution $32 million and then some every year. So this is very much her story to tell, because she's the one funding it. So will the minister commit to, if not exploring how we can improve this relationship, putting some accountability matrix on that grant? So if Aurora College isn't hitting these timelines, isn't making progress, then they lose their grant. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
From Rangeley, Minister for Education, Culture, and Employment.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I think that it's fair to say that given the investment of dollars from the N.W.T. Into the Aurora College transformation, along with the investment of dollars from the federal government into the transformation, that there are many people that want to see this happen. There's also a number of people who are sitting on the board who have said they are passionate about seeing this happen. It's also worthwhile acknowledging that the positions through the Aurora College transformation also came from the surplus of Aurora College. Aurora College carries a surplus. And so, Mr. Speaker, there are dollars that are available, and I think, yes, that there needs to be a conversation about how those dollars are being used to see this transformation through. I absolutely agree with the member that a significant amount of public dollars go to Aurora College and fund Aurora College, and those dollars are approved by this House, Mr. Speaker. So I look forward to seeing how that conversation evolves on the floor of this House. Thank you.
Member from Education, or Minister for Education, Culture, and Employment. Colleagues, the time is up for oral questions. Oral questions, oral questions, written questions, written questions. Return to written questions, return to written questions, Replies to the Commissioner's address. Replies to the Commissioner's address. Petitions. Petitions. Reports on committees on the review of bills. Reports of committees on the review of bills. Reports on standing and special committees. Reports on standing and special committees. Tabling of documents. Minister of ECC.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following two documents. Government of the Northwest Territories response to Committee Report 63-19, Bracket 2, Report on Bill 78, Forest Act, and Environment Rights Act, Annual Report 2023-2024. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of ECC. Tabling documents. Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document, Northwest Territories Law Foundation 41st Annual Report for the period ending June 30th, 2023. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister of Justice. Tabling documents. Tabling documents. Minister responsible for N.W.T. Power Corp.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table the following document, 2024-2025 Corporate Plan for the Northwest Territories Hydro Corporation and Northwest Territories Power Corporation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Minister responsible for N.W.T. Power Corp. Tabling of documents. Tabling of documents. Notice of motions. Notice of motions. Motions. Member from Range Lake.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whereas table document 94-20 brackets 1, 20, 24, 20, 28. I have the wrong motion, Mr. Speaker. Hold on. Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Whereas table document, nope, that's the same one. Okay, I'm just going to move to the operative clause, Mr. Speaker. Now, therefore, I move, seconded by the member for Frame Lake, that table document 67-20, brackets 1, mandate of the Government of the Northwest Territories 2023 to 2027 be referred to Committee of the Whole for consideration. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Motions in the order to the motion. Question has been called. All those in favor? Those opposed? Abstentions? Motion has been carried. Motions? Motions. Notice of motions of first reading of bills. Notice of motions for first reading of bills. First reading of bills. First reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Second reading of bills. Considerations in Committee of the Whole of bills and other matters. Minister Statements 4-20 brackets 1. Minister Statement 5-20 brackets 1. Minister Statement 17-20 brackets 1. Minister Statement 24-20 brackets 1. Table documents 93-20 brackets 1. Table document 67.20 or 67-20 brackets 1 with the member from the date show in the chair.
Good afternoon, colleagues. I now call the Committee of the Whole to order. What is the wish of committee?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, the committee wishes to consider table document number 06720-1, tabled on May 23rd, 2024, in Committee of the Whole.
Does the committee agree? Thank you. Committee we will proceed with the first item. Committee, we will take a short recess and resume with the first item. Thank you. Committee, we have agreed to consider table document 67-20 mandate of the Government of the Northwest Territories 2023 to 2027. I will now open the floor to general comments on table document 67-20 Any member may speak up for 10 minutes and may speak more than once at the okay. We're gonna 67-20 mandate of the Government of the Northwest Territories 2023 to 2027. I will now open the floor to general comments on table documents 67-20 Any member may speak up for up to 10 minutes and may speak more than once. Any? Any members wish to speak? Ms. Morgan.
Do I stand up? No, I sit down. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Chair. I have to say I'm quite pleased overall with how the mandate for the 20th Assembly turned out. I can't say the same about the business plans, unfortunately, but I will say lots more about that tomorrow. First, I feel that the development of the priorities was a collaborative process that all 19 of us could support. And while the mandate itself wasn't exactly collectively authored by all of us, and that, as an aside, is a wordsmithing exercise that I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy, done by a committee of 19 politicians. But there were numerous opportunities for both written and in-person feedback and discussion on the draft mandates. One thing I appreciate and I want to draw attention to, because it was based on some suggestions by regular members, is an opening list of commitments about how the public service will do its work. One of the most common messages I heard when I was campaigning last fall was the profound frustration with how the N.W.T operates and the general workplace environment. In my opening speech last November, I said, "We will not accomplish any ambitious priority we set for ourselves in this Assembly until we get our house in order." So in the mandate, while it may be tempting to skip straight down to the bullet points under each priority area, I encourage folks to carefully review the opening where it states, "The public service is the N.W.T's greatest resource and must be supported and respected within an environment that fosters a sense of purpose and well-being and empowers performance, excellence, and innovation." Our highly trained and dedicated public servants deserve to work in an environment that allows them to contribute to their fullest potential, that values and supports them in providing services with empathy and efficiency, and that encourages and rewards creativity and flexibility. Now, Cabinet Radio observed that some of the language used in the mandate would not be out of place in a wedding vow. That could spark some long and interesting discussions with the public and civil servants about the depth and steadfastness of anyone's love for the government. But there's no need for that debate today. I actually appreciate the tone of this mandate document. For me, it reads in an engaging, clear, and direct way with language that humanizes what we're trying to do instead of the usual jargon and bureaucraties. One of the commitments is to empower the public service by ensuring they're provided the flexibility to deliver programs and implement policies in ways that best serve residents. So that sounds simple, but if taken seriously, it could be a profound shift in the way our government works. The government often retreats into the safety of focusing on processes, policies, frameworks, plans, strategies, and it measures its success by checking off the boxes when we've completed those things. The idea here would be to measure our success by whether we've actually helped people, made their lives better. So people would come first at the end of the day, not the letter of the policy. In that same Cabin Radio article, the Premier related that commitment to putting people first to the need to increase the government's risk tolerance. So I agree that we should be talking more openly about risk tolerance in government. And that is unfortunately something that is missing from that list of commitments. I believe we need to enshrine a commitment to always consider in every decision not only the risks of new options, but also the risks in maintaining the status quo. We're often biased towards accepting or just taking for granted the status quo, even when it is unjust, expensive, inefficient, while we exaggerate the risks inherent in any change. So we have to train ourselves to examine the risks and costs of the status quo first. Another commitment that I would have liked to see more detail on is the last one around openness, transparency, and accountability by engaging with partners, the public, and the public service. So this is a major source of public frustration, and I believe we should be explaining how this government is going to do it differently. I believe we need to commit to share information as early and as freely as possible, and to publicly admit when we make mistakes and communicate how we will learn from them and do better. Now to the main priority areas, starting with housing. The emphasis in housing is on partnerships, including Indigenous, federal, and community governments, and by working to encourage private investment. I understand and appreciate that emphasis because the scale of housing needs in the N.W.T is vast, and the N.W.T simply does not have the resources to be making billion-dollar ribbon-cutting announcements about new housing. So we have to be strategic and try to leverage federal and private investment. That being said, we need to be open about or come to terms with the fact that public housing is going to continue to fall squarely on the N.W.T's shoulders. Indigenous governments are accessing significant federal funding for housing, but my understanding is they do not want to or intend to take on public housing. But I haven't seen this government articulate anywhere our vision when it comes to public housing, what we're actually committed to accomplish in public housing over this Assembly. How are we planning to maintain our current public housing assets, repair and improve the quality of existing housing, plenty of which is currently boarded up, and what is our plan to try to prevent vandalism and damage going forward? On economic foundations, one of the big reasons I pushed us to include the word foundations with this priority, of course, was to highlight the importance of JK-12 education and basic literacy. And currently, these are entirely missing from the mandate and business plans. Now, I understand that the district education authorities rightfully maintain a lot of control over education, but this government has an important role in setting goals and expectations. The last Assembly set a goal of increasing graduation rates, which was not successful, and I believe that that goal misses the point. I think we need to set clear goals around literacy and allocate resources inside and outside the formal education system to give us a chance of meeting the goals. Another important foundation of the economy is energy, and the mandate talks about investments in green power generation and transmission. I just want to point out that often people associate green energy and reducing emissions only with electricity, but we need to remember that transportation and heating, including those associated with heavy industry like mining, are our biggest sources of GHG emissions and also carry high costs. So we need to think more broadly and strategically about our energy transition than just electricity. In terms of healthcare, I support the ideas in this section and the emphasis on primary care, but I do think there's not enough recognition of the need for a new approach to retention of healthcare workers. Now, we always hear the phrase recruitment and retention spoken in the same breath, but we're actually doing quite well in recruitment, yet we're losing staff faster than we can hire them. Retention requires a significantly different strategy than recruitment, so I think we need to start separating them in our thinking. With regard to addressing the effects of trauma, One thing that's not explicitly mentioned is the need to address the root causes of family violence and gender-based violence and support survivors and their families in breaking the cycle. We do have a significant amount of federal funding to do this work, but I don't want that work to be done in the shadows. The mandate emphasizes that Indigenous governments will need to take the lead on culturally appropriate trauma treatment, mental wellness, and addictions programming. Now, I understand the value in this. I'm just not sure how well Yellowknife can see itself in the way this priority is worded in the mandate. Yellowknife, obviously, is where almost half of our population resides, including many people from small communities who are struggling the most with addictions and mental wellness. The work of serving these folks often falls on nonprofits in Yellowknife, but they are usually not eligible for the same sorts of federal funding opportunities as Indigenous governments. So it's not clear to me how they're supposed to take the lead on developing and delivering new programming when they can't even access basic sustainable funding to keep their doors open. Beyond capital or startup funding, the nonprofits in Yellowknife need ongoing operational support, support for medical professionals, outreach services, outreach nurses, and social workers who usually work for the N.W.T. So we need to see these kinds of partnerships reflected in the mandate and the business plans. This also relates to the mandate item around public safety, which emphasizes the need for working together with law enforcement. So often it falls on law enforcement to deal with non-criminal social issues. But I think the RCMP themselves would be the first to tell you they should not be doing that, and their resources should be reserved for criminal issues. While there's renewed emphasis on the land healing and wellness supports and aftercare support, there are still significant gaps in the spectrum of mental health and addictions.
Is there anybody else, any other members that would like to speak? See no more comments. Thank you, committee. Do you agree that? Okay. Member for Frame Lake.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And yeah, I'm sorry, I was just waiting to see if some other members. Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I was just going to see if other members wanted to speak up, but in absence of them, I will definitely share some thoughts. Yeah, I have a bit of prepared comments here, and we'll try to go off the cuff a little bit also. So I'm going to do my best here to speak to the mandate specifically and not the business plans because they are separate documents. We are looking at them separately. But at this point, I do think it's difficult to separate the two because anything measurable is contained in the business plans, and lack of measurable targets and tangible action was one of my main concerns with the draft mandate when it was first presented to us, and certainly I shared that sentiment in comments to my colleagues in caucus and also in a follow-up email. I appreciate the government tabling the business plans publicly, and I'm hesitantly open to supporting the idea of putting measurables in the business plans if the plan is to make the documents public going forward, which it is as I see right now. We can discuss the level to which measurable goals have been sufficiently included in the business plans when we discuss those specifically. For the mandate, I would say that for the average citizen, and indeed ourselves, the disadvantage with this new approach is that we have made figuring out exactly what the government is doing and when it plans to achieve it a much more difficult and convoluted task. So the business plans are a 280-page document. So currently, there isn't a place where a person can quickly look to the mandate and determine what the government is specifically working to achieve under each mandate statement or item. The mandate statements are quite broad and I think could be criticized to be saying a lot of things that the government is currently working on. So it's hard to say that this is particularly visionary. I think that this is a gap which the government should work to address in its public communications and suggest it would help both the public and members to better track and hold the government to account for mandate progress if we did have a place where we could access the mandate and the very specific measurable items that are associated with it. I realize that's going to be in the business plans, but again, it's a 280-page document, and we can't quickly go through those and sort of identify targets. Excuse me. So on one hand, we have created much more focused priorities, which I was a strong advocate for and I'm glad we achieved, but the government has taken those and expanded upon them to the point where they are now attached to a document which is hundreds of pages long, and as I can personally attest, takes days to pore through in detail. So to the mandate itself, the mandate as tabled speaks to challenging status quo and driving positive change. When I look at the 2024-25 budget as proposed, I've found myself questioning how much are we really challenging status quo, and particularly questioning the government's understanding of what the process of priority setting truly involves. I'll speak to that sentiment more in response to the budget itself. To the mandate itself, I will say that for the most part I agree with and appreciate the sentiments shared by the previous speaker, the member for Yellowknife North. I do see myself, particularly in the priorities that were set by caucus, by the 19 members. I am pleased to see housing at the top, a strong economic foundation, access to health care. Those are things that I specifically campaigned on and committed to residents to bring to the table as priorities, and so I'm very happy to see those in there. So I think that we were focused in our priority setting, and I am pleased to see that those priorities are being spoken to throughout the business plan. So I do think the government has done its best to focus on the priorities when implementing the business plans. Again, I'll speak to those more in specific tomorrow. So the difficulty with the mandate, of course, is the lack of measurability in it. And I think that it remains to be seen if the process of attaching mandate to business plans is going to be an effective way to track progress and hold the government to account. So I think that probably how I can most helpfully provide comment here is just to speak to each individual item and what it means to me, because I haven't had a chance to kind of speak to the mandate itself. So housing. What did I mean when I brought housing forward as a priority? To put it quite simply, what that meant to me is that we were going to be increasing housing stock available to residents in the territory, making it more affordable to get into housing in the territory, and in particular also investing in operations and maintenance of housing in the territory, which we have fallen woefully behind upon. And we simply have not been funding O&M of housing at the level to which we need to over the past number of years, focusing more on capital projects. And so the difficulty with that, of course, is that housing stock is slowly decreasing in quality and needing repair and falling out of repair and having to be taken offline when what we need to be doing is kind of maintaining what we have and building more. So that's what I meant. And so we've said that we're increasing housing availability. Whether we have, as the member for Yellowknife North mentioned, kind of a solid plan for doing that, I think we have not yet quite articulated what our long-term plan is and what we're really trying to achieve. So I'm hoping that we can get there with the business plans. I'm going to speak to the economy. It's amazing how quickly we run out of time here. Speaking to the economy, I think the one that I want to speak to the most here is growing and enhancing the northern workforce by investing in skill development and attracting skilled workers to the N.W.T. I very much appreciate that this is the top item in economy, and I have more to say on this topic when we get to business plans and perhaps reply to the budget address, but the bottom line I'll say is that the foundation of a strong economy is people, and the reason for building a strong economy is people. And so investing in people through housing, through education, through health, I think is how we build the foundation for a strong economy. And that's mostly what I meant when I was speaking to that. I think that the other items that are in here are things that I've contributed to, and agree with also. I think I agree with the comments made by my previous colleague there on power infrastructure and just acknowledging that there's a little bit more to this than just green power generation and transmission. Access to healthcare, I'm quite happy with what we've put in here. I think it's simple. I hope that it's achievable. And certainly what I was saying during the election and what I brought forward as a priority is focusing on access to primary care in the N.W.T, and that is at the top of the list here. So I am pleased to see that. As for the next ones, addressing the effects of trauma, emergency management, I think I'm pleased with what's in there. Again, whether we can be measurable in what we're doing. I have some comments specific to emergency management that I think I'll save for a statement because they're quite specific, and I'm quickly running out of time. On public safety, on this item, I definitely asked some questions during development of the mandate that I put to Cabinet, and want to speak to those a little bit. And just want to note that there's a strong connection between public safety and the items that we have in addressing the effects of trauma and access to healthcare that I think I would like to have seen us create some better connections between. And that is just to say, quite simply, most of the social problems that we are facing in the Northwest Territories are not problems that we can police our way out of. And scientifically, and research behind these topics has shown time and time again that you can't police your way out of social issues. The way out of social issues is poverty reduction, treating addictions, mental health, wellness, ensuring that everybody has equal ability to participate in the economy. That's what truly helps societies get over social ills. It's not something that you can just take people and put them in jail and expect that the problems are going to go away. So, I've got 20 seconds left. I had a bit of a comment that I wanted to make, but I guess I'll have to include that in either tomorrow's or in a reply to the budget address, so I'll leave my comments at that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Thank you, member from Frame Lake, Mr. Testart.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. I was just reminding colleagues that you may speak twice to an item if the chair allows, but once my time is sorted out on the clock, I will begin. Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, who likes ice cream? I think you'll find most people do. It takes a real curmudgeonly character to not enjoy a sweet treat. And much like that sentiment with this mandate, there's a lot to like in here. It's an aspirational document that speaks to how the government is going to take the priorities of this assembly seriously and deliver on them. What it's short on is detail and tangible outcomes. And that is largely my issue with this document. I look to the business plans, which the previous speaker, my friend from Frame Lake, spoke to, is 280 pages. And within those pages, you will find concrete and tangible outcomes. There are some spending targets and commitments identified. There are timelines for legislation. There are numbers of houses to be built, those kind of details. Without that, this document remains comfortably in the stratosphere of an aspirational document, which is fine to have. I think these kind of documents are important. This kind of language is important, and to remain hopeful and collaborative is important as well. But is it useful as a priority-setting document? I don't think so. I think it's pretty clear we worked collaboratively to develop those priorities, and what we want to see is tangible outcomes to make them a reality. So we can go back to our constituents and say, this is what this government did. If I go back to someone now and say, we've increased investment certainty and create opportunities for the private sector by streamlining administrative processes and ensuring regulatory systems and decision-making are consistent, efficient, and predictable. That's a nice principle to have, but how do we do that? What is the what? That's the objective. How are we going to get there? And we still don't, and the answer is in those business plans, and that's what requires more scrutiny, I think, from this House to really see if we're achieving these things. And I guess when we speak to process, because process is important to any government and any governing institution, and certainly a legislative institution as well, I have to ask, is this the best process for this assembly? If this isn't a really useful accountability tool, if it's not a useful tool for setting mandates, because we're already setting mandates through business plans and mandate letters, then what is it really? And I think we could have skipped this step and gone straight into the business plans or straight into the mandate letters. And I'm just concerned that if we continue on this path, we have this commitment to take more risks. We're going to see a government that creates a risk secretariat that's going to evaluate risks and give the government policy guides on what risks to take and what risks not to take, and we're going to establish a new process for that. We need to just govern. We need to just give, a clear budget address that has these priorities in it, that shows how we're going to invest in them, and then, asks members to support it. And so I just wish we would be a little less cautious in even how we go about the business here. It's taken us a long time to get to this point, and we're still waiting to pass our first real budget that's going to have tangible outcomes. And I don't think everyone's happy with that budget. So it's going to take negotiation. It's going to take back and forth. I think we're slow on that process as well. And the clock is counting down, not just on my time, but on our time in this assembly as well. So I want to see us succeed. I want to see us work together to succeed. But I also want to make sure we're maximizing our time effectively. And I think sometimes we get bogged down in process like this when we could just be moving forward with something more concrete and tangible. So that being said, I support everything that's in here, 100%. But I do want to see the how, the why, the what, how we're going to achieve these things. And that, for me, that this document leaves more questions than answers. So I look forward to tomorrow's review of business plans, when we'll have more to say about that. But until then, I think I've said everything that needs to be said from my perspective on this document. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, member from Range Lake. Is there any other member that would like to speak? Ms. N.W.T would like.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Premier and Cabinet, for the mandate, issuing the mandate, tabling the mandate. I appreciate the work's been done on it. I concur with some of what's been said with my colleagues in that, it's great to have the mandate. I support the mandate. It is a good document. It's a high-level document, but as we know, where the rubber hits the road will be in the business plans. And that's where as we said, we have things that are deliverable and measurable, and things we can look to do to what we need to do to get our work done. And, I get it, like everyone gets it. There's only so much budget to go around. There's only so many things we can do. And, there's many things in there that we know we need to get done, and I appreciate that we're looking at that over 4 years. I appreciate that the Premier has his 50-year plan as well, which I know we want to look to where we have to get in the future. Having said that, the government, to set that path to prosperity, I guess we need to continue to look outside the box. We need to continue to look at different solutions. I like that in there. You see a lot of working with Indigenous governments, with NGOs, with municipal governments. I think it's so important, as I've said previously, to look at redundancies and where we're spending our money and where money can be spent otherwise, and look at opportunities to access funding that maybe we would not have been able to access without that. So I think that's also very important, and that we continue that. We sat around as 19 of us before we sat in this house. We talked about those things. We met for 2 days with the Indigenous governments, and we talked about those things, about how we can look at redundancies and how we can think outside the box. So I think it's, I've stated that many times. I've spoke many times about our whole of community approach. Well, I think that also, translates into a whole of government approach. Not only us working together as a consensus government and doing what we need to do, and working with other governments as well within our territory. You know, and we'll touch on this on the business plans a little more tomorrow, but looking at the economy, we need revenue, we need to grow. You know, we need to look again outside the box, ways we can grow. And, you know, one of my colleagues talked about people. It's very important about recruitment, about getting people to work in the territory and getting people that are working outside the territory potentially back in the territory. And I think that's so very important for us, and not just for, you know, people talk about the transfer payments, but for the other things, the income tax, the work that, you know, the work that people do, the rent they pay, the groceries they buy, the hockey coaches they provide. Those things are all important to us as a territory as well. As I said previously, sorry, I just lost my thought there for 1 second. Yes, that whole community approach. Anyway, Madam Chair, when we do get to the business plans tomorrow, we'll be able to discuss some more of that. We'll look at, again, talking about the economy. We know we don't touch on things that are happening in the territory. We need to focus on things that what's happening in my region, where the Nunavut are leading the charge on developing natural gas up there. And as we know we have the third largest reserves of natural gas in the world. And, you know, we rarely, that's kind of something we hardly hear spoke about here. We talk about the mining industry, which is super important to us, but there's also other industries still with potential here. The world still needs natural gas. They still need that product yet for a while, so it's important, I think, that we look at that. We look at the Inuvik satellite station in Inuvik and the things that are going on there, things like that, outside the box thinking that can provide some of that revenue for our government. So yeah, I think I will leave it at that. Again, thank you. As my colleague from Range Lake has said, I support this document. I appreciate the document, but much work to be done, and I look forward to going through the business plans. Thank you.
Thank you, member from Inuvik Bootleg. Any other members? See no more member from Yellowknife Center.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. Chairperson. I was trying to decide if I wanted to speak to the mandate or not. I mean, you heard largely what my colleagues had said, and I mean, just working backwards, I mean, it's really tough to disagree with this. I mean, because the statements are so high level. You know, I often feel that the public wants more and expects more, and this is the fault of consensus government, which is we can't be specific, and the only reason we can't be specific is because it's us. We choose to be that way. If I was in charge of a mandate by myself, or is able to sort of like prime my colleagues to agree, I mean, we'd say simply, as I said earlier today in my statement, which is, you know, we would mandate 100 new homes for social housing. You know, we'd work towards that goal. We would commit the forces, like a team, an army, to meet these challenges. We'd say, for example, today, we're going to work to get 150 kilometers of Mackenzie Valley Highway done by the end of this term. And to me, those are the types of things that the public's looking for. I mean, if I was to quote President George Bush, I mean, I'd say mission accomplished with this little hit chuckle, because the mandate itself looks like it's largely completed already. And the problem is the Cabinet's hearing this as a criticism, but it's not a criticism. The problem is these things are written as so wide. I mean, you know, better streamline admin process, engage public. I mean, we do that every day now. You know, sometimes better, sometimes worse, but in all fairness, we do this. You know, open and transparent government. I mean, we try those things, we do those things. I mean, none of this is new. That's the problem. I mean, every government, including the ones, the 21st Assembly, etc., and on and on and on, will be struggling with the same phrases. How do we break free from the the static position of, of the static truth of mandates, which is they're statements that, nothing is groundbreaking. I mean, I'm not advocating for party politics, but, when a government comes into force, I mean, it says, I'm going to make highways, or I'm going to set up a bottle depot in every community, or in the sense of recycling, and or we're going to build more houses, and this is how many we're going to build. And that's the problem with this process, is we don't even, we're almost afraid of our shadow to make those commitments. And I don't know why that it continues to be this way. I mean, I can keep advocating for more, be specific, and I will continue to advocate, but it's an unfortunate symptom of the way we do work. I mean, I believe in empowering the Premier to lead the Cabinet, but we don't do it that way. I believe and they should be able to make decisions, but yet we tie ourselves up into these ball of yarns that are fought over by kittens, so they're quite a mess, unable to follow a line of decision making and process and getting free. I mean, it's such a tangled web of confusion sometimes. And what do? We further hit ourselves with more policy and process. I mean, the general public, I find in my experience, wanted to hear things like, we're going to build 2 more addiction centers by the end of this term. Like, I'm serious, that's specific. They would like to hear that. And I know we can't do everything for everybody, but that's the reality of government, which is you try your best, but at least try. I don't think my point on another 150 kilometers of Mackenzie Valley Highway being built, if we only did 149, I don't think people would be angry with us. I think they would be inspired by our blazing trail of call to action, I mean, when I hear deliver equitable access to sustainable primary health care, I mean, that is every day. I mean, I can't imagine someone not attempting to deliver equitable access to sustainable primary care. I mean, it's hard to imagine that isn't the case. And it's frustrating because, like I say, when I talk to people, they want to hear specifics. They want to hear that there is a call to action and one that they can measure us, every one of us, against. And for better or for worse, that at least helps, inspires us. Because, I mean, if we said we were going to build another 100 public housing units to help people, and, that would be an easy way to rally behind, because, I mean, we'd be looking to the left of us and say, how do we help and get this darn thing done? And we'd be looking to the right and say, how do we get those things done? And, you do your part because we're all going to do it. But now it's just, well, we're going to work together. That's the mandate, and that's really what it says. I mean, the last 2 speakers are right. I mean, of course they support this. I mean, who doesn't support working on addressing the effects of trauma? But, as an example, or emergency management, who doesn't support any of these things? I mean, it's impossible not to support them. But again, Madam Chairperson, the challenge, like I say, is that I think it largely it shouldn't be taken personal, and it's not intended to be personal, but I mean, the public really is frustrated by these challenges, which is, what does it really say? And what does it really mean? And what does it really deliver? And for me to go back to them or speak to them at my constituency meeting, which, by the way, is at 6:30 tonight for all those listening at Javaroma, till 8:30. I mean, the reality is they want to know and be able to sink their teeth into something. And to that, I see the ultimate frustration of, what are politicians really saying? What are they accomplishing? What are they doing? I have nothing to measure them by. And then when it comes polling day, they're rating you on your personality, basically, as opposed to the government. Or they're mad at the government and blaming regular members, which is often, I've seen the case. The government doing this, and it must be your fault. But if you read this, I mean, we've already done it. I mean, so Madam Chair, yes, I support the Public Safety Initiative statements. I support all the statements. I can run through them all, but I don't think I'll do that. So if I just say I support them all, I mean, it's hard not to. And that's the frustration about the mandate, is that we've waited over 6 months to see statements that don't have specifics. And I don't know, if I had my way, like I say, I mean, the government would pick 5 or 6 areas, target them very precisely, and show the public we're going to rise to the challenge, and if we don't rise, we're going to darndest do our best. And to that, I suspect every one of us in this room will be rewarded with either the good cheers or good support, at least emotionally, with our communities for having the best interest, their best interest in our hearts. And that really, in some ways, is a lot of the work we do here. So I'm going to say that's all I have to say right now. But of course, I reserve my right to reflect differently in a different direction as as the moment spurs or as other members inspire. So anyway, thank you, Madam Chairperson, and good luck on measuring these things. Cheers.
Thank you, member from Yellowknife Centre. Member from Wolfley.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, when Premier made his speech at the beginning, balance the budget and to build good working relationship with the Indigenous government, settling outstanding land claims, etc. I like that, and I'm sure I'm not the only one that was pleased with that statement. There's a lot of other First Nations that didn't settle their land claims were also pleased as well, So, which is a good start. I like that, But this mandate here, there's 9 pages, and they are right, it is very vague. Here, access to health care, deliver equitable access to sustainable primary care in all N.W.T communities. Not in all, there are going to be some communities, how would you accommodate for a community like Wukoti, So not every one of them, we're not going to have this equitable access, So it's just that how they're going to do this is one of the things that kind of missing in the mandate. But I know it's in the business plan, but it's very long. And something like this where the mandate, 9 pages, but it's just that it would have been nice if there was more explanations and details of how they're going to do it. So I have no issues. It's just that I know this turnaround, this government is doing something different, which we didn't have this mandate, we didn't have this business plan, but we had the main estimate. So main estimate, that's where we ask all those questions. But I guess now that, tomorrow, we're going to be discussing that tomorrow, and we'll look into it more. But even with the housing, to end homelessness, especially in small communities, in larger center, yes, there's more of our people are moving to larger center because to have a better life. We can have that in small communities if we had access to more program and services, if we had more housing, because there's not too many people in the small communities where homelessness should not be an issue. And it doesn't say that in here too, that they talk about the homelessness, but it's mostly in regional center, not in small communities. So I do have issues with that. And mental health services, we do have lots of issues there. And public safety, it talked about here, law enforcement, in small communities like Gamity, they don't have an RCMP. They've been asking to ensure public safety, they do need an RCMP or law enforcement, or a law enforcement, some form of law enforcement in that community, and Wukoti too as well. It's not just them, but there are other communities that are lacking that services. So it would have been nice how, they're going to be focusing on crime prevention. In small communities, there's lots of issues. We lack a lot of recreation activities. There's not much to do for our young people. So all they do is just, the only activities that most of these communities have is the school activities. there's nothing outside of school in some of the communities. So we do need more, and it would have been nice if that was identified in here too as well, you know, because and lately the crime has been happening due to drug related. So it's just that I do like what I see here, but it's just that it would have been nice if it was explained more in detail. I don't want to talk down the clock, but I'm sure there are other members here that wants to talk as well. But I do like what the Premier, the Premier said in his statement before, that, Indigenous government, Indigenous people having good working relationship with them is more important for us, especially from the small communities. So that's all I wanted to say. Thank you.
Thank you. From a member of Mofwi, Premier.
Thank you, and thank you everyone for the comments. I do appreciate it. I know that this is a departure from previous mandates of this government and of other mandates that you would see in a system where there's a political party who could bring together their apparatus, come up with a plan, and lay that out on day one. The reason that this mandate is sparse in terms of actual deliverables is because I've seen 2 mandates prior to this government. I've been involved with the Assembly for 2 previous terms, and each of those mandates had hundreds. I think the first one had hundreds, the second one had maybe 170 commitments in there. And they were specific commitments, and I did not find that to be a great way to, I guess, to govern. I didn't find that to be the most useful document. As a regular member, I rarely ever referred to that mandate. If there were issues in my constituency, I would speak with businesses or constituents, and over time I would determine whether or not things had gotten better by how people interacted with the system. If people's problems were never solved, then I knew things weren't getting better. You can really get a sense of how things are operating and how the government is doing just through the day-to-day business of being an MLA. So I wasn't too concerned about deliverables in here, or sorry, measurements in here, but as the members point out, it is in the mandate, or in the business plans. In terms of these areas being broad, yes, some of them are very broad. So it was mentioned the healthcare commitment to deliver equitable access to suitable primary health care. And that's one of only 4 commitments under that area. And so what that does to me, it says if you're going to bring forward something about healthcare, you bring forward a program or an ask, it better be focused on ensuring equitable access to primary health care. So it's a way to filter out some of the other things that the government does that perhaps don't focus on the priorities of the Assembly. Similarly, there's comments in there about streamlining administrative processes. So if a program is coming forward, it better have streamlined administrative processes. If there's an initiative, it better be reducing the regulatory burden. So as much as what we're going to do, this is a signal to the government of what we're not going to do. We're not going to do the same things. We're going to bring forward initiatives that are in line with this mandate. And so it is different. I didn't want to do the same thing. I didn't want to tie this government to initiatives that were created within the first month or 2 after the priorities were developed, because it was only 3 months ago that the priorities of the Assembly were set. So I know we've been here 6 months, but it hasn't been 6 months that we've had the priorities to develop this mandate. So I won't say much more, but I do look forward to working with the members and Cabinet and Indigenous government partners, as was pointed out, to really flesh out what we're going to do and how we're going to do it. And we're going to do it by working together. Thank you.
Thank you, Premier. Yellowknife North.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do make a daily goal for myself of not going over my time limit, and I failed once again. Maybe tomorrow. I just had a few sentences left. So I was just going to say that I appreciate the renewed emphasis under addressing the effects of trauma on the land healing and wellness supports and aftercare support, but there are still some significant gaps in the spectrum of mental health and addiction supports that I think we need to talk more about, including harm reduction and stabilization, including managed alcohol programs, and also medically supported detox facilities, which there's not nearly enough capacity for in this territory. And just to conclude, when we embarked on this process of setting priorities, I, like many others, wanted to see a strategic plan type document with measurable and outcome-oriented goals. Now, we didn't get there with the priorities or with the mandate, and you could argue that a strategic plan was not ever going to be part of these documents. It turns out that there are many stages along the way, which is fine as long as it all nests together and leads us ultimately to that strategic plan. Unfortunately, so far I see a major disconnect between this mandate and the business plan, but I'll speak more to that tomorrow. So thank you, Madam Chair, for letting me finish my statement.
Thank you, member from Yellowknife North. Frame Lake, member for Frame Lake.
Yep, I'm just waiting for my time. Thank you, Madam Chair, for indulging a second round, and I just wanted to quickly kind of provide my my closing comments here. So just a couple more points. I mean, as I spoke to earlier, I appreciated Cabinet kind of listening to our comments, and I certainly saw mine reflected in the updated mandate document, so I appreciate them listening, and wanted to highlight just a few things. One is the statement on page 2 about strengthening collaboration between departments. It goes on to talk about fostering a sense of purpose and well-being and empowering performance and excellence and innovation in our staff. There's another bullet point on page 3, empowering the public service by ensuring they are provided the flexibility to deliver programs, and honoring the GNWT's commitments to openness, transparency, and accountability. So those statements, I just wanted to highlight those because I wanted to note that some of those things I think some people would say are a pretty monumental shift in how the GNWT does business, and that is something that I was advocating for. I noted in my comments on the mandate that I wanted to see us speak to, let's see here. I was talking about things like implementing results-based management systems, program measurement, a reference to changing management structure and practice to better facilitate employee empowerment and engagement. So I was hoping to see specifics like that. And also a commitment to improving workplace morale and employee satisfaction. I would note, unfortunately, that workplace morale and employee satisfaction has been noted to be fairly low in recent surveys of staff. So I just wanted to point out these statements and say that they're very nice to see and hear, and it remains to be seen that we're going to remain committed to these and ensure that we actually implement them with policies, with changes to how things are done, with shifts in the way management is done at the GNWT. And I think those, as I said, would be quite monumental shifts, and I think they'd be very appreciated by a lot of people, including myself, because I think these shifts are one of the keys to ensuring that these mandate commitments actually get implemented. So I'm just going to share some closing comments that I shared with Cabinet when we were in caucus. I wanted to make the comments publicly also. Let's be bold. Let's take risks. I think we all know that we're facing major challenges during the term of this Assembly, and that status quo is not acceptable, nor will it get us where we need to go. And so I want to encourage Cabinet to take those risks. You've spoken to it in the mandate, and I want to see you do it on the ground. With regard to the relationship between regular members and Cabinet, I think that we often see the differences between our two sides, but the distinction is much less significant for the public who put us in here. I think people judge our success as an Assembly based on the successes and operations of the government. So your success is our success, and I want us to be working together, like you've said, to achieve that. I also want to speak to kind of just the specific work of MLAs. I want, as much as possible, our committee projects to align with the mandate and help investigate and make recommendations as to how we can improve our ability to achieve it. So that's my commitment back to Cabinet, is that when working on the regular MLA side, we'll be scoping out our projects and doing projects that relate to either mandate or business plan items, things that either we have expertise in or we think need an extra lens on to ensure that we are actually making good on some of these commitments, because this is a very ambitious list of tasks and we have a very short period of time to achieve them. What I want to see from Cabinet is strong leadership to ensure that the bureaucracy is implementing what we're talking about in this room on the ground, particularly with regards to working collaboratively, helping people, ensuring that people perceive the change we're talking about here in their communities and in their interactions with the government. So that's pretty much it from me. And when I speak to strong leadership, what I mean is, are we seeing change that we're talking about here actually implemented? And so some of you will notice that I haven't been providing questions ahead of time as much as I was in the first session, and that's I was saying to one of the ministers earlier that one of the reasons for that is I want to know what the ministers are bringing to the table in terms of leadership for these departments. And so I do want to hear the minister's voice, not just the department's voice when we're asking questions. And so having taken 5 minutes already, I think I'll leave my comments at that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, member from Frame Lake. Seeing no more comments, thank you, committee. Do you agree that you have concluded consideration of table document 67-20 brackets 1? Thank you, committee. We have concluded consideration of table document 67-20 brackets 1. Member for Boot Lake.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I move that the chair rise and report progress.
There is a motion on the floor to report progress. The motion is in order and non-debatable. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? Motion is carried. I will now rise and report progress.
I'll call this House back to order. Member from Ditchell, can I have the report of the Committee of the Whole?
Mr. Speaker, your committee has been considering table document 67-20(1) and would like to report progress.
Thank you. Member for the Ditchell, do I have a seconder for the report of Committee of the Whole? A member from Range Lake. Thank you. The motion is in order and is non-debatable. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? All those abstaining? The motion has been carried and the report of the Committee of the Whole has been concurred with. Thank you. Third readings of bills. Third readings of bills. Mr. Clerk, orders of the day.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Orders of the day for Tuesday, May 28th, 2024, 1:30 p.m. Prayer, minister statements, member statements, recognition of visitors in the gallery, replies to the budget address, day 3 of 7, reports of committees on the review of bills, reports of standing and special committees, returns to oral questions, acknowledgements, oral questions, written questions, returns to written questions, replies to the Commissioner's address. Petitions, tabling of documents, notices of motion, motions, motion 26-20(1), notice of motions for first reading of bills, second reading of bills, consideration in Committee of the Whole of bills and other matters, Minister Statements 4, 5, 17, 24, and table document 93-20(1), report of Committee of the Whole, third reading of bills, orders of the day. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. The House stands adjourned until Tuesday, May 28, 2024 at 1:30 p.m.